psychology than that for Mali. So you can see that the psychology that Kiri is articulating is very much this feeling of this post-colonial kind of discrimination and colonization that drove the state to where it is. And that article, the special issue that we assigned, expresses this in no uncertain terms. The Kiwi Chinese were really different because they had exactly the same experience of discrimination. It was terrible, egregious discrimination. The poll tax for most of the century was £100. £100 100 years ago is a huge amount of money, especially for a laborer brought in to try to get gold from some Otago mine. But they don't hold on to that at all. So it was a really different psychology that these Kiwi Chinese were embracing their Kiwiness and very reluctant to make clear categorical distinctions between their in-group and New Zealanders at large. So what you saw was exactly what Anna was talking about. It's a self-definitional issue. These Kiwi Chinese were actually emphasizing their Kiwiness as much as their Chineseness. And there would be no movement on their part to produce an indigenous psychology because the borders, as Anna was saying, are so fused and so interpenetrating that you'd never be able to work it out. So there was a very strong self-definition. You can say why. One is that their numbers are so small. Like in as late as 1986, there were only 26,000 people of ethnic Chinese descent in New Zealand. That was a time when the population of New Zealand would have been a little under 3 million. That is a minuscule minority, one that is not a secure identity position. And so there are certain realities. No one can ever answer the question how many indigenous psychologies there are. But there does seem to be an intuition that below a certain number, it's not a viable or safe position. Their historical experience was egregious discrimination and this desire to keep your head down because the majority group could stomp on you at any time. And so it's this kind of myth of the model minority that is not entirely mythological because this generation has done really well and is really different from the new migrants. So this is this issue that I think they're facing very much at this American Indian Psychology Conference because there's maybe a couple of 3 strong Indian nations. Navajo probably would be the strongest one. The others are maybe there's a few of them that have some gambling under this one. So there's this real reluctance among the Native Americans that I detected, first of all, to fuse into one or to clearly distinguish amongst one another. You know what I'm saying? They're very much trying to maintain this ambiguous, tenuous connection to one another.
Almost to render themselves invisible, because that's possibly the safest place to be. If you stick your head up, out of the woods, you may get it chopped off. So it's just an easier place to be, just living below the radar. And so that's how they exist, below the radar, below the level of public scrutiny. And, don't stand out, but blend in. Because the truth of the matter is that those American Indian leaders like Vine Deloria and Ward Churchill, you've got one of his readings in the session for next week, Wilma Mankiller, when they've stuck their heads up and put their necks on the chopping block, they've paid a very great personal price for it. And so, you have to make a decision at some point in your life when you're involved in a movement or a struggle like that. Do I continue to stick my head up and make myself vulnerable to getting it, chopped off or attacked? Or do I find other very careful strategies and ways to keep myself intact and to keep my family intact and my people intact? And so some of these people have very deliberately and consciously chosen to work within their own populations, to only venture out into white American psychological networks when there is a serious fight to be had and when they've got support on their side. And I think it's important to state that this isn't a black versus white issue. This is not an Indigenous versus non-Indigenous issue. This is a desire as Indigenous peoples to have our own epistemologies and ways of knowing and doing and being in the world, accepted as valid as, you know, another cultural or another culture's position on ways of knowing and being in the world. It's not to say I need to put you down in order to elevate myself. It's about saying these are the skills and the gifts and the cultural treasures that we have that are restorative, that are healing. We can come together. We can work side by side. And this is a fairly classic example in this institution of a, you know, I don't know, Chinese American Toei, whatever we call you, working in a bicultural partnership with an Indigenous woman. So what I'm saying is we don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater. If there are the people that we worked with from the North Dakota Reservation, the Rosebud Reservation, the most deprived, the most, it's just a hotbed of abuse and trauma and multi-generational suffering and oppression and you name it, it's all there. But they have chosen to take the best that white Western clinical psychology has to offer and combine it with the reclamation of their cultural healing traditions and to approach healing in an integrated way. But they are Indigenous practitioners working with Indigenous peoples. You won't find them in a hospital, you won't find them in a DHB, you won't find them in a mainstream organisation.
And the fascinating thing about this was just kind of going back to the issue of how many Indigenous psychologies we have. What I saw with some of the practitioners among the people at this conference was that they very much use their spirituality as part of the healing. And I became aware that if you live under the kind of circumstances that many of these Native Americans find themselves in, as Kiri is saying, these are fairly deprived circumstances. If you don't make use of this spirituality, this power of religion, it's almost like you're fighting with one hand behind your back. And that's because, like I said, some of these young men I talked with, he was so into the supernatural that if you don't relate to him on this, you're almost just cutting that out. And why should you cut that out? And so these are these real issues around things. And then the second one is around, and so this kind of metaphysical level would seem to cut across American Indian psychology. But then whenever you try to generalize something like this, one of the Native Americans say, wait on, you Mohawks and Navajos might be like that, but we Onondaga are not like that. And you'll constantly get this. It is so complex. And so this issue of indigenization is really not a simple issue. It has pros and cons, these pluses and minuses. And in a group that's so deprived of resources as American Indians, they've just chosen not to articulate these things very clearly.